Well, good afternoon, good morning, or good evening, depending on where you are in this world. Welcome to today's DevOps.com webinar, How to Really Achieve DevOps Transformation. I'm Charlene O'Hanlon, I'm the moderator for today's event, and as you can see, I'm surrounded by some really interesting, exciting, and very, very intelligent people. We have Robert Stroud from Forrester. We have Sunil Pillai from Infostretch. We have Brian Dawson from CloudBees, and we have Brad Hart from Perfecto. Thank you, gentlemen, for joining me today. I am so excited about today's webinar.
Thanks for having us.
Thanks for having us.
Great. Well, we're going to have a hopefully a spirited conversation about really how companies can go about achieving DevOps transformation. And I know all of you have much experience in the field, and I'm hoping that today our audience members will be able to partake in your knowledge and really walk away with some useful information. So why don't we go ahead and get started? It's going to be a question and answer session, obviously, and I really want everybody to get involved in the conversation. So I also want to remind the audience that we are taking questions for any of our panelists today. So if, at any time during the presentation, if you have any questions for anybody, just please feel free to use that control panel there and get your questions in. Also do want to remind the audience that we are recording today's session. So if you missed any or all of today's webinar, feel free to take a look at it about 24 hours post-event on DevOps.com. And with that, we'll go ahead and get things started. Rob, you are my first victim today. How are you doing?
Good. Happy to be a victim.
Great, great. All right. Well, let's get things kicked off with this question about, really where we are kind of in that DevOps transformation, especially within enterprises. I mean, really, where do you see it happening now, and what do you see as kind of the hurdles that are kind of maybe slowing things down?
Multi-part question to get going. So, I think DevOps has fundamentally now reached what I call escape velocity. We're seeing it, what was the purview of development organizations almost totally, and unicorns, Netflixes of the world, etc., and Etsy's, has really become mainstream. And it's fueling part of the fuel of the business transformation that's going on in the industry today. Recent DevOps heat map survey that we did showed that retail banking and finance, believe it or not, is actually leading the pack right now in terms of the DevOps transformation. And we're seeing massive investment, especially in their mobile applications, their web applications, and their net new products in go-to-market, as they look to transform the way they develop, and develop in a significantly fast manner in terms of more velocity. The other aspect that's really interesting in our research shows that there's two maturity levels of DevOps right now. There's one of what we call the people who've been doing it for a couple of years, and they're getting quite good at it. And they're doing quite well in terms of maybe being a maturity level 2 or 3, depending on how you rate it. And there's a lot of people who are just starting. And it's interesting, the increase have really changed lately from ops and dev professionals to enterprise architects and CIOs who are looking to actually transform their organizations and scale it. So one of the things I'll just leave my opening remarks with is that the biggest problem we see at the moment is scaling. How do I take something that's in a small team group, or an application or a division or an end user department, and scale that across the whole company? And that's a good problem to have, and one that I'm very happy to be talking about.
Okay, great. Well, thanks very much. I'm sorry, guys. We're having a little bit of a technical difficulty with the videos here, but we're going to get that taken care of for you really quickly. Sunil, I'd like to kind of turn things over to you, but before we do, I want to make sure that none of our panelists have anything that they would like to add to what Rob has said.
I think one thing just came to my mind when Rob was talking is that when we deal with some of the engagements with our client, what we've seen is DevOps is now front and center when think of setting up teams and thinking about what their cadences, what development should be and processes should be. While in the past it was something that was added on to existing teams. So I think that is the major shift that we are witnessing, across the board. And I think that's great, actually.
Excellent. Anybody else?
Nothing to add here.
Okay. All right. Great. Well, then we'll go ahead and move along. Sunil, thank you for being part of this today. This is, like I said before, such a great topic, and I think the audience is really going to get a lot out of it. My question to you is, how do companies know where they are in their maturity, and what really they should be doing to advance?
Sure. First of all, I'm really happy to be here, and it's exciting to be part of this group. Maturity and DevOps has been something that a lot of companies struggle with, and it's a very, very pertinent question. I think the important part to remember that customers would never be at a single point in the maturity curve, right? Because DevOps really transcends a lot of things. It goes all the way from culture to tools to talking about test automation, the infrastructure, build processes, deployment processes. And often what we've seen is that customers are pretty mature in couple of those areas, and they are pretty much at the nascent stage in some other areas. So in order to really look at a holistic view of where they are on a maturity curve, what we suggest is that basically they have to kind of look at a maturity matrix across all these different vectors, and then run some kind of an assessment tool to really see at what point they are in each of these areas. And the reason for kind of doing that is because the next steps that customers have to take really to kind of mature could take one or two different dimensions, right? So one is they could really say that, okay, there are certain areas where we really need to kind of do a lot of advancement, and we put a lot of budget and resources on that. But there are certain areas where we're really good, but I think we could really get a lot of bang for the buck by really optimizing it. So using the maturity curve along with an assessment, a maturity model along with the assessment, what customers get to see is what are the immediate holes that they can plug to really advance where they are, and what should be their long-term strategy in kind of either re-architecting projects, processes, etc. So that's how I think they can really leverage the maturity model to advance forward.
Okay. Great. Anybody have anything that they'd like to maybe disagree with Sunil on?
I absolutely disagree with everything Sunil said. No. I think Sunil is spot on. A couple of things that I would add are being that DevOps is really about a culture, right? A sort of set of tenets that you subscribe to and aspire to a certain extent. When you talk about the cultural aspects of DevOps, sort of the people and culture aspect, you could say that maturity can be somewhat subjective. So a couple of things that I would add: while it's important to try to quantify what level of maturity you're at, what level of maturity you're trying to achieve, and where you are along the road, it is also important to understand that there really isn't a one-size-fits-all recipe for DevOps. So you have to approach your maturity somewhat subjectively. I'll also add, actually, Sunil and I have worked together on one of the CloudBees concepts of something called the 4 quadrants of DevOps maturity. Right now, the approach with this is not to say that it's a maturity model that's going to give you specific steps to execute, which is absolutely required, but rather it starts at a higher level and says, okay, how do we talk across teams in the software delivery lifecycle? How do we start by considering what enterprise DevOps is as opposed to implementation on a single team? And how do we sort of gain initial alignment on our overall maturity and overall objectives? So in summary, I think absolutely measurement is important. Measurement is key to this. Keep in mind that those objectives and that measurement may be somewhat subjective, and it does help to simplify and get a high level of maturity as you're starting your transformation.
Okay. All right.
But if we talk about that for a minute, and one of the things we see, though, in most DevOps executions, let's call them an execution, they're to support some aspect of business transformation. So we're going to start probably in one team, but I think we're only just starting to see organizations take an enterprise view first. That's probably a change in the last 6 months from the majority of calls. It didn't exist 6 months ago. Would that be true of everybody's experience, or is it just my little corner of customer inquiries?
No, I agree. And if when we focus on scaling, Rob, I'd say it's a pretty key thing. If ultimately you're going to implement it across the enterprise, as you start to build out from teams, all along the way, you're thinking about what an enterprise implementation looks like, or else you're going to hit a ceiling or a sort of inhibitors that are hard to cross.
Yeah, I mean, and that's something that we see when we sell to, large enterprises. And a typical project isn't one team. It could be up to 50 teams that some are working on the front end, the back end, third-party client services, APIs, et cetera, and they're all at different levels, and they don't all have the same requirements. So, your front end team might be super agile, all plugged into DevOps, daily deployments, but the back end team might still be waterfall. So that's where we see our real challenges as the different groups who still have to come together at the end to make a cohesive product. They need to be assessed independently, and they each need help along this journey in different ways.
Okay. All right. Excellent. So, Brian, it'd be interesting to hear from your perspective. When companies are really starting down that DevOps journey, what do you see as the benchmarks for them? And then, really keeping that in mind, what are some of the principles that you think teams need to follow to really achieve that successful DevOps implementation?
Yeah. And I'll try to parse this. This question, I see them as being two slightly different things, but I'll try to address it. So let's start with principles, right? Because they tend to be more qualitative, oftentimes less quantitative than DevOps metrics. Overall, and this is going to sound cliche, frankly, but I believe that you should be entering with a principle of collaboration, right? And that's collaboration early and often. And that collaboration is then going to lead to what is really required for speed, repeatability, and reliability. And that is a focus on automation. And ultimately, because the path to success is never a linear path, it's never a clean one, you also have to be prepared to embrace experimentation.
Well, so the thing is, if you think about the way software was traditionally developed, right? Developers would work, they would do their pre-commit validation, get code, they'd be building, working, collaborating together. But then, they don't really know it's done, it's good, until maybe they give QA a drop every week, every 2 weeks. That's a very common pattern that we see. And that's too long, right? That's the opposite of continuous. And there's a couple of big problems there, because one, you can't move forward. Right? If people strive to go from back in the day releasing quarterly and then releasing monthly and weekly and daily, and they want to go, multiple times a day, you need to know what you've done is good. So the developer takes code, they've been given a feature or a bug fix, and they submit that code, it leaves their little fingertips, they think they're good, right? Because they never write bad code. But we know that that's, reality. Maybe they forgot to check something in, maybe they didn't implement it right, or it didn't fix the problem. So that the idea is that continuous feedback, it's so critical, because you don't want to have to wait. You don't want to defer decisions. You want to know you're good to go now. And the other problem that comes in is one of the things that we've been trying to work a lot with customers on, we've seen really help, is the faster that the developers get feedback on what the changes they've done, it saves them time overall. So I could be a developer, submit a defect fix, right? I'm in a certain area of code, I submit my change. And if I don't find out for 2 weeks that it didn't fix the problem, or it broke something else, right? Not only did we delay our ability to release that code by 2 weeks, but as a developer, if you told me within 10 minutes, because I ran a build, ran it in CI, and I got feedback right away that it was broken, I can maybe fix it in 10 minutes, right? I'm already in the code, I've got my environment, I'm not context switching. If you take somebody who was working here, and then you don't tell them for 2 weeks, and they're already working over here, it's too hard for the developer to kind of switch back mentally, to get their environment back, to get their mindset back. So the overall time to fix a problem is a lot longer. So the idea of getting continuous feedback to the developers, to the team leaders, so they can get instantaneous, per build, nightly feedback on exactly what the health and the state of their DevOps project is, it's going to make things go exponentially faster. It's not just waiting a certain amount of time, the test. It's being able to avoiding that context switching. So it's very important, and it allows you to make good decisions, actionable decisions quicker, real time. That's the goal, is to get real time.
Anybody disagree?
I think one of the great examples that we've seen, exactly to what Brad mentioning, is we have a customer we worked with, and the earliest they would know when a developer broke something is during the nightly build. So typically it could be like the whole day, right? So what they realized after they kind of implemented DevOps and continuous feedback is, not only are you getting continuous feedback, you're getting timely feedback, and what that has changed? That's changed the developer mentality on and they want to check in more often now, because they really want to know things going faster. Earlier it was like, oh, I'm going to just go and test internally before I even push anything out. That is a side effect of having this process where developers are now ready to kind of push in code faster, wait for feedback, and then could push in more. And I think overall productivity as a result definitely it enhances. So yes, it's pretty very important to get continuous and timely feedback.
Excellent. Rob, I feel like you want to say something.
Oh, many things. Continuous feedback is a key part of this, and we're talking about the developer side a lot here, and it does increase developer productivity. It's very interesting. One of the stats that we pull is that the average developer spends 20% of their time writing code. 1 day out of 5. That's not
amazing.
a lot of time, is it? I'd like to come to work 1 day out of 5. That'd be good. So one of the value props of this continuous feedback is if we can just get that developer to spend 1.5 days out of 5 writing code, that's a 50% productivity increase. And that's one of the value props of what we're talking about here, is we want to actually give them continuous feedback so that they can be more productive, ideate more, take ideas more. And, ultimately, this is what we're after. This is the objective. And we talked about KPIs just a question ago. I mean, one of the questions is if I can generate more lines of code, more lines of value, yeah, I'm going to make mistakes. That's okay. Mm-hmm. You're going to tell me about them sooner. But when I don't, I'm moved on to the next thing and I can focus on it. This is a really key part of the value prop that we often lose.
Okay, now it's actually a really great seg into my next question, which has to do with your most recent blog. You talked about how DevOps is actually transitioning from kind of those unicorn companies to really to be company-wide initiatives. So can you kind of give us some ideas or share a little bit of what you know about how some of these larger companies are implementing and leveraging DevOps?
Yeah, so we are definitely seeing a transition. It's not just the Netflixes and the X's and Amazons anymore. It's most companies. We're seeing this happen across the board. Most industries, with the exception of government, they're a bit slower, but still happening. And what they're actually looking to do is they're looking to change the way they work. So a large, bank in global bank will use that to keep their name protected. But they're really transitioning now into a position where they started off just in their mobile division, their web division, where they did mobile payments and their web app, and they got that right, and they implemented product teams. So now they have a product team that owns each capability within their organization. And now they've rolled that out very successfully. The product teams work together. Originally, they could pick and choose their own tools, and that did lead to wonderful tool proliferation. They had 480 different tools, by the way, in their DevOps tool chains. And that's good or bad, and I won't argue the merits of it either way. But what they actually found is over time, as they worked together and shared knowledge and collaborated, they've now got to a point where product teams are being formed across the organization. So they're now transitioning where there's this true end-to-end ownership of the products and the services and the components. And teams are actually cross-skilling, they're getting really good domain knowledge, they're starting to form relationships, they can cover for each other, they know each other's weaknesses and strengths. And that's now led to a situation where they actually don't want to release daily or hourly, they want to release weekly. And weekly is a significant advance on where they were just 6 months ago when they released every 6 months. And this is not unusual, right? And if you look at that velocity increase, it's really being reflected now in smaller pieces of change happening more regularly, and it requires less documentation, less retraining, less education of the consumers. Now this is a mainstream financial services org. Now they had to do this to compete with the fintechs that are coming out there. And you look at another manufacturing organization, right, where they're actually changing the way they do manufacturing now, where they're using DevOps, and they've actually been using it forever by doing discrete manufacturing. They've been doing it, have their production line set to the order line so they can change things. They're applying the same thing in their code now that they deliver. And that's really allowing them to transition. But the biggest headache that each of them have had is breaking down the functional silos. Functional silos exist, right, where, I'm the ops person, don't come near me, don't touch my production system. I'll kill you if you do. And, the reality of it is that they stand behind compliance and governance and risk and claim there's laws that protect them. And the reality of what we're going to talk about, I'm sure more, is the fact that if you put good automation in place, end-to-end automation in place, you can actually overcome a lot of those issues. And that's one of the things we're learning now, is we take DevOps from dev and no ops to DevOps now, which is what we're really doing. We're actually starting to shift testing, performance testing, user performance testing, CX, validation. We're shifting all that left so that when the code gets to production, it breaks less. So, the recent reports show that we're seeing more availability and more uptime. And this is what we're really seeing. All organizations now are doing this. And the final point I'll end on is I've just finished doing a piece of work with another financial services org, where they are now going to scale DevOps across their whole organization, mainframe as well as distributed.
Wow.
And now mainframe is becoming an equal citizen in the DevOps agenda. So they're actually not just writing stuff on distributed or cloud, they're actually going back and writing code on mainframe. And they've actually set the situation up now so they can release a whole release at once, all together, all dependencies noted, all pieces working. And they don't have to wait till midnight Sunday night to do it anymore. They can actually do it 3 o'clock on Wednesday afternoon if they want. And typically they know the risk and impact, and if it fails, they can back out in seconds. It's amazing to see. And it's really changed some perspectives in terms of the industry. And this is at scale. This is not just the product team sitting over in the web app anymore. It's the whole organization.
It's pretty amazing to think about, because I remember when a lot of companies were starting to transition to just even using cloud services, and a lot of companies were using the excuse that they would be out of compliance, or they had a whole bevy of excuses that they were using to not move to the cloud. And now it sounds like a lot of those same excuses are being used for DevOps. So it's kind of interesting that it's almost like a one-size-fits-all excuse for some of these companies. But I'm glad to see that slowly but surely the veil is being lifted, and these companies are realizing that they're not going to be out of compliance if they use it, the DevOps kind of culture methodology. It's actually helpful to their organizations, such as just in the same way that the cloud is.
Absolutely, and compliance is interesting, and I know some of my other colleagues will have some comments, but there are some rules that that are kind of rigid, that say that the same people who write the code shouldn't implement the code, but it doesn't say that you actually have to have another human touch it. And we've seen good automation leverage and be used to leverage that rollout in a successful manner with full audit and compliance. It requires some thinking. It requires some process. And actually you have to put your pipeline process under change management to conform to these rules like you would a piece of code. And everything should be code these days. Everything should be treated as code.
Anybody else have any thoughts on the compliance issue and anything else that might be kind of slowing down the DevOps?
Well, yeah, but I actually have a lot I'd like to add what Rob said. Actually, those are I love those stats. Those are very good points. I have some questions for you. Maybe we'll grab a remote beer offline. I think you brought up a few things when we talk about compliance, right? We really talked about a software delivery process that is organized with discretely different functional groups, each sort of heroically and arguably selfishly protecting their own domain because they know best for that part of the process, right? And that has lent its way to compliance. Look, I'm QA, I know quality, I know how the software should function, just give it to me and I'll figure it out. I'm operations. At the end of the day, they're gonna come to me, or the security group's gonna come to me and kick my butt when we've had a vulnerable component come in and land on our server. So I'm gonna protect that, because at the end of the day, it's me on the line, right? But sort of shift left as we're looking to now rotate this down. I think, Rob, you bring up something really important that we oftentimes don't dare to say. To properly implement DevOps, you ultimately, maybe gradually over time, have to look at reorganizing, whether it's permanent or whether it's matrixed, right? So we are now cutting across. That starts to speak to the shared ownership tenet of DevOps. And you really can't get fast flow, rapid delivery, and rapid recovery, and sort of until you rotate, tear down those silos. Now, what I often like to say is, we look at processes in terms of being risk adverse, of the time all the way back when we used to put program code on punch cards or on tape, right? Or we printed up 100,000 disks, and the recovery for an error was very, very expensive, right? We now have systems in place, cloud technology, automation, more robust and flexible languages, environments, and architecture. We have the capability to recover from errors fast, but yet we're still like, let's wait, let's inspect everything. Now, I think something that the Agile movement first brought in and DevOps sort of accepts is errors are inevitable. Mm-hmm. And to Brad's point from earlier talking about feedback, we're better than trying to do everything we can do to prevent the inevitable. Let's accept the inevitable is going to happen and position ourselves to respond quickly. And Rob, what you've talked about with the reorganization and cross-functional groups enables that.
Great. Perfect. Okay, so another thing, Rob, that you brought up was the idea that the mainframes are very much a part of the DevOps ecosystem these days, and it's actually something I've been hearing a lot more about. But that in and of itself is a great seg for the question that I have for Sunil, which is, when we're talking about the different types of tools and everything that you need to implement DevOps, do you have to actually retire those legacy systems and those legacy tools to implement DevOps, or can they, I don't know, can they use both legacy and new tools, or what's the strategy overall that companies really need to think about?
That is the $10 million question.
Well, congratulations, you get that question.
I know I was reading this the other day, and it really struck with me. And it said that there are no legacy systems; it's only legacy thinking. And I think that is very pertinent to this question. So when you look at legacy tools for DevOps, they are we cannot take them disassociated with the legacy applications that they are really there to serve, right? So really, when you talk about legacy tools, we have to really think about the legacy application. So trying to modernize your tool chain without trying to really look at the applications that's supposed to be serving is really not a good strategy. Mm-hmm. So really, when I think of legacy tools, I really try to look at the applications themselves and see what can be done within those existing tool sets and tool chain for those legacy applications without having to really talk about, okay, do I need to rip this completely? For example, if you look at current legacy processes, there are often a lot of manual steps that happen, right? Either on deployment, on build, code checkout, etc. And that by itself is a lot of optimization that you can do, and that does not even need a rip out of your existing tool sets, right? The existing tool sets can probably aid in that process, but they can really work in conjunction with your existing tool sets in the tool chain that you're really already using. But really, automation. So a lot of automation of manual steps itself can give you a lot of runway with legacy systems. Then you can look at infrastructure, right? So you have infrastructure, you would think you're moving to the cloud, maybe move to the hybrid cloud so that you also serve some of the constituents you have in your legacy system. Third part is automation. right? So you can look at your test automation, for example. You can look at your test automation and see what is the coverage that you have right now. And often we find when we work with our clients is that, there is a lot of optimization that can be done just in legacy, with legacy applications, just on the test automation side. So that gives you another set of runway. So when you look at, so my take with legacy tools essentially is that, the modern tool sets are designed for DevOps, from the ground up. But, it is often important to kind of look at your legacy tool set and see, although they're not built to be resilient sometimes, right? So they're not built to kind of always be continuously running, but they can always be retrofitted to kind of fix things automatically when things break. So that is one kind of approach to, kind of take. So in summary, our approach always has been, from Infostretch, and for me, when I talk to customers, is that, try to see what optimizations that you can do with the existing tool set, and then there are different design patterns to kind of slowly migrate over from one tool set to the other. So one of the clients that we did a major migration project for DevOps from an old set of tool sets to newer, we spend a lot of time kind of thinking about the migration strategy itself, because there are points of time during the migration of one to the other when you have both systems actually working in tandem. And that is very important for a successful move from legacy to new, right? So it is not a none or all strategy, right? There's always a middle ground, and there are ways to kind of deal with that.
Okay, makes total sense to me. Great. So anybody have anything they'd like to add to Sunil's comments?
Yeah, it's Rob. I'll just add one thing. Sunil made great points there. One of the challenges, though, is with DevOps, the data we have clearly shows that the one of the weaknesses we have is the pipeline. Our pipelines are typically automated, even in the DevOps world, in silos of automation. In fact, less than 30% of organizations have end-to-end automated pipelines, right? And the challenge is, and it's okay if we've done integrations to have those, different tools integrated, but the reality is most companies are doing manual handoffs. And actually, this is the biggest failure of DevOps from a practical perspective, is that this lack of integrated automation, lack of using tools. I'm not fussed whether they're new or old, but the fact we actually don't use technology to automate the handoffs is really introducing human error again further down the chain after we've done that good work we talked about in the first part of this call. And I think it's one of the both opportunities and challenges we've got to really work on as an industry.
Point well taken. Okay. Anyone else? Okay. So Brian, back to you. I've got just
Yes.
kind of it's something that's been coming up in conversations lately, and that's the idea of DevOps as a service. What do you think of that? What do you think it is, and can you kind of explain it to everybody?
DevOps as a service is a fallacy. It doesn't exist.
All right then.
Controversial statement, right? And there's a couple of ways to look at DevOps as a service. Now, I think what some people intend by it is real, right? Some people may think of DevOps as a service as sort of DevOps in a box, right? How do I go out and buy DevOps? How do I give my team DevOps and make it something that they can just go through like a vending machine, put a couple of requisition dollars in, and now they get out of DevOps process. Look, as I think we've all said here at some point, some people may have heard me say, or I've said to you guys, DevOps is not, actually, to borrow from a colleague of mine, DevOps is not something you can do. You don't do DevOps. It's not something you can package. It's not something you can sell, right? It's something you can achieve, and you continuously work to improve. So the other take I see on DevOps as a service, though, is being that underlying component, to go back to the tools and automation conversation, right? I'd say sort of commoditization and packaging of that tools and automation to implement a CD process which teams can rapidly adopt. Mm-hmm. That I think is achievable. That I think is real. And that I think is invaluable as organizations start to take an enterprise approach to implementing DevOps. In the past, DevOps used to start sort of these change initiatives, would start by a forward-looking dev lead, manager, individual contributor that takes it upon himself to start to bring in some improvement and implement and innovation. Now what we have to start to do is look to architect this. So it's something that'll stand the test of time. It's something that'll scale across teams. It's something that will meet enterprise objectives. What this requires is that we have to balance the flexibility of individual team and technologies needs and the need to have some level of standardization and shared implementation so we can more rapidly adopt this without burdening individual teams with undue administration overhead, be that of your delivery tools, be that of your target system, be that of your reporting and analytics databases, etc. So now we ask, what is DevOps as a service? DevOps as a service doesn't exist. You can provide CD as a service. CD as a service is about identifying shared tools, shared systems, and shared environments so that you can reliably implement DevOps at scale.
Okay. Anybody have anything they'd like to add or contradict?
Not contradict, but what we have seen is, is we have seen companies who have central teams providing CI, CD, as Brian mentioned, as a service to other development teams, and that is to the extent that we've seen practical implementations of the concept. And what happens with DevOps as a service, essentially, as Brian mentioned, there are different connotations. One is that it's a SaaS-based model that you can DevOps from. It could also be, it really means that from an organization perspective, it is almost like a black box where you get CI/CD services you can really leverage. And that is, I think, the real value of CI/CD as a service, the real value of what this is all about. Otherwise, yeah, I agree with Brian.
Well, I think you just disagreed with me, Sunil, and you said DevOps. But yeah, I like the differentiation quickly, right? Is that that there are a couple of connotations, right? And one of the things we're seeing at CloudBees is people that are not quite ready to go to SaaS, though, as I think Rob would note with some stats and probably others as Brad has seen here, organizations are rapidly getting comfortable with moving the majority of these things to the cloud, in particular their CI/CD pipeline. In fact, over 50% of the Jenkins workload is run on AWS. The majority of workloads for private SaaS implementations are CD tooling, right? And that sort of speaks to two different things, and I'll try to get through this quick, right? You can provide not DevOps as a service, a CD as a service in the cloud using a number of providers, or what you can look to do is build out sort of centrally managed, internally managed CD as a service for your teams. Both of them achieve those end objectives that I've talked about, right? Scalability, repeatability for taking this across your organization.
Well, that makes sense. I mean, it's such an important part of DevOps is culture, and I guess to me, I didn't know how somebody could, do DevOps as a service. It's not like you can provide culture as a service. It's right. So yeah. So I would agree with you there.
Some will buy it. I'm selling it, Shirley.
No. One of the things too to kind of carry on too is we've seen, traditionally, some of our largest customers are in finance and insurance, and these guys would never even consider using cloud services for anything, like barely even for email, not even 2 years ago. And we're seeing them shift. And, part of the thing is what the service-based offerings do is they allow people, they don't have to reinvent the wheel over and over again and spend all that overhead building things that already exist, right? These service companies, CloudBees, allow people to leverage, leverage best practices that they're the expert at, right? So that this financial institution can worry about managing the organizational change and the structural change and focus on building their product, not, re-implementing, a CI/CD architecture, right? So people are finally getting the value that it's okay to use tools and frameworks that were built by other people. And it's helping them go a lot faster and achieve their goal a lot faster.
Right, and I think that there's a real place in DevOps for that. I think that, but I do agree with Brian that the terminology DevOps as a service is a misnomer, and it actually kind of provides a disservice to the concept as a whole, because it really does kind of commoditize the idea of, you know, you can just buy these particular types of tools and platforms, and voila, you're doing DevOps. And obviously, as we all know, that's not the case. So interesting stuff. It's I'm so glad that we have these conversations. And I do want to remind the audience that if you have a question for any of our panelists, there is still time. We're going to take about maybe 1 or 2 more questions that we have prepared for our panelists, and then we're going to move on to the audience questions. We have a ton already, but if you have a question, please don't hesitate to get it in. If we don't get to your question during the webinar, I'm sure these guys would be more than happy to follow up with you. But you know, Brad, I don't want to leave you out. So let's go ahead and move on to your question, which is, you know, that whole concept of shifting left when in DevOps. And so, you know, how can a company do that and really kind of do their testing earlier in that DevOps cycle? I know it's kind of an odd concept for some companies to grasp.
Well, let's first start with the why, right? You know, shift left is a buzzword, right? But why? Why is this important? So I'll give you an example of a customer we've been working with in the financial industry. I'm not going to say the name of the bank, but they're in America, very large. And what they did is they did an analysis on the cost of fixing a defect in production versus fixing it when it was found in QA versus found in development. And the cost in production of finding a defect and resolving it and the impact it has on the business is measured in the tens of thousands of dollars, if not more. Whereas, you know, in QA it might be $800-900, and I forget the exact numbers. You know, in development it's like $100, right? So there's a real cost. If you find all your defects in production, it's going to cost you millions and millions of dollars, and you dramatically reduce those costs if you find them earlier in development. So not only are you saving yourself money, you're also having a happier customer base, and you're releasing quicker. So I kind of gave some examples earlier with, this is all kind of part of the continuous feedback, right? Continuous feedback means you're shifting the feedback left to the development teams. But it's also helping put some of the onus on those teams in their environments of the definition of done, right? That's an agile term, right? But the dev team needs to know they don't just throw it over the wall anymore, right? And part of shifting left is to achieve it. You just can't we've seen some organizations take a stab at it, and they were told to shift left. So what they try to do is they try to take their end-to-end suites and jam them into the development CI environment. And that doesn't work, because all it does is create tons and tons of noise. Having 10,000 automated tests that you run every time somebody does a check-in and have it always be red is no good, right? A bunch of red tests all the time doesn't help anybody. It's noise, and it just causes a distraction. So we work with the organizations to try to help them, and the ones that we've seen go down this path of shifting left the best is they don't try to ram their whole thing left. What they do is figure out what's smart, right? What do we do at each stage? They sort of model the development pipeline from what are we going to do pre-commit? What unit tests are developers going to do? What are they going to do for pre-commit validation before they submit their code, right? Do something at the developer workstation as an individual, and then expand that, right? They do their commit, and it kicks off Jenkins, and it does a build and does a smoke test, something a little bit smaller, but always green, right? You want tests to be always green unless there's a real problem, right? And then it goes, are they going to do in scheduled tests? Are they doing nightly tests, regression? And eventually it works its way to the QA person. The idea is that you want to save human time, right? You're by the time code drop gets to the QA end-to-end people, because I don't care if you have QA people sitting on the Scrum teams, there is going to be a phase code's going to go through some QA organization end-to-end kind of testing, right? As all the team's code's coming together, right? But by the time it gets in their hands, it should have gone through multiple stages of testing, right? That has been part of the shift left process, with more and more gradual, maturity being built into the code by the time it gets to a human. And then therefore they're not spending their time finding defects that could have been caught in CI. They're spending their time validating. Does this look the way we thought it would look? You know, a business analyst can say, does this meet the customer's need? Not dealing with things that are broken because we didn't test early enough. So the process is critical. It reduces cost. It dramatically increases efficiency. It increases velocity, but you have to do it smart, right? You have to think, and that's part of what, you know, I spend a lot of time working with customers is, what do I test and when? How do I build the level of testing so we don't slow down development, but yet we also don't introduce problems by the time it gets to the QA team. And that's a real strategy that you need to incorporate.
Okay. Anybody have anything they want to add to that? That was a great explanation there.
So I just had one point, Brad. A case study I'm just writing up at the moment. Organization had 100% of defects found by their end users just a few years ago, right?
Wow. That's not a good way to do it.
Yeah, but that was normal software development 5 or 6 years ago, right? It was, yep. You know, basically put it out there and we'll see what happens. And that's why enterprises never went to version 1. It was waited for, you know, the second version. They are now at a point where I think from memory, it's almost 90% of all defects are found in development. And they can now, they have now got so much time back, they have dramatically increased their velocity of features to production. I mean, it's just an amazing stat that if you stop finding those bugs by your end users, they also upgrade. That's the other advantage. Almost all the users are on the current version. I mean, a huge turnaround in just a very short time.
Yeah,
and that's the value you're talking about, Brad.
Yeah, that's amazing. That's amazing data.
I think mobile has had a lot to do with that, kind of change that mindset. I do want to switch gears now and move over to audience questions, because when I say we've got a ton, I mean, we got a ton here, folks. And we only have about 10 minutes left. So let's go ahead and maybe we'll do some lightning round things. First one is for Rob. Question is really, what distinguishes DevOps culture change from maybe like Agile and Scrum?
So Agile and Scrum pretty much impact the development organization changing and the requirements. The real transition of DevOps is it's organizational wide. It actually tackles everything from requirements ideation right through to deployment to production and the ongoing success and happiness of products and services being run. That's the lightning round answer.
Perfect. All right, great. Moving on, Sunil, got a question for you. For organizations that are just starting to assess their DevOps maturity, is there an industry standard or recommendations for a DevOps maturity model or an assessment tool that could be used as a starting point? Any suggestions?
Right. So there isn't an industry standard, but you know, as Brian mentioned, Infostretch and CloudBees work together to create an assessment model to work against a maturity, assessment tool against a maturity model, and that is a great tool to really assess where an organization is. But there isn't a real industry-wide standard because of the wide spectrum that DevOps really covers.
Okay. All right. Great. Brian, is DevOps the next iteration or evolution of iterative development?
Can I answer Sunil's question instead?
Oh, you can answer both of them. Go right ahead.
We're going lightning round, so I won't chime in. Yes, I mean, I don't know that it's so much the next iteration, iterative development, but to go back to something that to what Rob said about the difference between DevOps and Agile and Scrum, and then tie it back to what Brad said. What we're really doing is we're extending the definition of done to be what is really required to be confident at the time that you have gone through an iteration, you have delivered what is expected, and through automation and sort of end-to-end systems, enabling us to get that feedback that we need to continue to ensure we're delivering value through an iterative development cycle. I will say that what people have found is they optimize the left-hand side in terms of project planning and execution practices. but they ended up finding if they still had legacy and waterfall delivery practices on the right-hand side, they did not get the expected value from their implementation in Agile Scrum on the left-hand side. So it's bringing them together.
Okay.
I'll go faster next time.
No, that's fine. That's fine. Okay, Brad, got a question for you. You mentioned you were talking about continuous feedback before. So to get continuous feedback, is it mandatory to have continuous testing?
You know, certainly, especially given who I work for. But you know, you have to have feedback on something, right? So but the feedback comes in more than just automated testing of my application, right? If I'm you know, running through my CI/CD stack, you know, doing deployments, right? What does that look like? You know, feedback around you know, performance data, right? How we're performing in different geographies. It's user validation, right? Feedback comes from many different sources. Continuous testing is very important, but it is only one key part of it. So it's required, but it's not the only thing to focus on, right? There's a whole variability of things that you need to consider when you look at the overall feedback.
Okay.
User ratings, like everything.
Yeah.
Excellent. All right. Anybody else that want to add on to that, or we good?
We're good.
Okay, great. So I have another question here for you, Rob. What are some recommendations to start integrating previously siloed operations team to the development or delivery teams?
Oh, it's a great question, one that we've been asked a lot lately. And the first, the successful method I've seen is where first we put infrastructure as code in place, where we start developing consistent infrastructure deployment, and we apply the DevOps methodology to delivering what our infrastructure stacks look like. That then allows you to redeploy resources in your ops team to put as part of product teams. So you actually include the ops person as product teams. This is what I see happening in a lot of organizations now, where they come in and become part of it, and they ensure that the ops requirements of monitoring, customer experience, appropriate incident triage documentation where it's required, and all become part of the development organization and all become part of the team. So when the code is no longer tossed over the fence but transitioned through the process, those requirements are met day one. And the results are really simple. If you do it right, your incident count reduces dramatically, meaning you need less people to actually resolve incidents. It's really an interesting statistic that we're starting to see. And if the team owns the code, they actually have to go and fix it, which is even better. And another thing we've just started to see implemented is most sprint teams are now got a requirement for technical debt as a percentage of user stories. And the number that we're starting to see used now is 15%. So 15% of every sprint must be technical debt retirement. Kind of interesting.
That is interesting.
Yeah. And I'd like to add something, if I may.
Sure.
You know, what I've seen is I have had oftentimes my time in the field, I've had to deal with organizations who either couldn't rapidly reorg their teams to be product-based or feature-based teams, or they wouldn't, right? So we'd start with incremental transformation. And to your point, Rob, you know, one of the things I've recommended and I've seen implemented successfully is even if you still have sort of a legacy operations team that is maybe on the path to implementing infrastructure as code, but it's not fully there, let's still, at minimum, get ops representation and traditional QA representation on the Scrum team so that you're actually participating in your story creation up front. And worst case, you're getting advanced insights, you're providing the team feedback on decisions that are being made in the story and how they impact downstream. But you also can look forward into your traditional transfer information into your traditional operations team backlog to have them prepared to address what's coming down the pipe and give them visibility. So Rob, big +1, right, on getting that operations participation up front in the planning.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, Brian, I concur. I mean, the most highly functional organizations we've seen have the ops and QA as part of the actual teams, and whether they dotted line or whatever, it rolls both ways. So just the decision making happens so much faster, and you make better quality decisions as you go forward. It's the right way to do it.
Well, you guys are giving me segs left and right, because I think we have time for one more question here, and I've got it for Sunil. And the question is, should DevOps teams be part of Scrum teams, or should they be separate teams? And then what is the best organization structure for a successful DevOps transformation? So it sounds like we've already started that conversation.
Yeah, I think exactly. Just to add on to what Rob, Brian, and Brad just mentioned, Dev and Ops, obviously they have kind of to work together. So I think the more important question here is, to be a successful Scrum team, you need to have a DevOps, an automation system in place, right? A CI/CD. So it's more important to have that laid out so that the teams themselves are pretty self-sustaining in terms of leveraging DevOps across their entire product and development cycle, right? So it's not that important that you really have an ops person consistently embedded with your team. It is important to have them available and have them kind of provide the right infrastructure for the team to be successful. So I think that's, to me, is the right way to kind of look at that question.
Okay. Anybody have anything they want to add? Last 60 seconds or so.
Hey, we're still learning. DevOps is still learning. And what we're talking about now, we may contradict ourselves in 6 months, right? So who knows?
I hope we're not contradicting ourselves in 6 months, but I agree. You
got to be able to read and react. It's agile, right?
That's right, exactly.
I haven't worked container in the last hour. I'm very happy.
And we have disagreed enough today. So.
Okay, great. Well, that is all the time that we have for the questions. If we didn't get to your questions, first of all, I apologize. Time just ran away from us, but certainly I'm sure these guys will be more than happy to address your questions offline. So with that, it just leaves me to thank Robert Stroud with Forrester, Sunil Pillai from Infostretch, Brian Dawson from CloudBees, and Brad Hart from Perfecto. Thank you all for joining me today. It has been such a great conversation, and I hope we can do it again soon.
I hope so.
Thank you, Charlene. Thanks, guys.
Great.
Great.
All right. Have a great day, everybody.